Hello. Today I have Professor Arvind Sahay. He's been my professor of marketing. So all this marketing fundas that I talk about, a lot of them have been taught by Sir because I was when I had gone to IIM Ahmedabad, a chartered accountant who knew nothing beyond NPV and RR. So it was Sir who introduced me, and the concept of that paper I realized was DMCV, designing and managing consumer value. So very fond memories I have with Sir, and he's been kind enough to come on the show. So welcome to the show, Sir.
Thank you, Anurag. Always a pleasure to be talking to you.
Yes, sir. So I'll come straight away into the questions. And before we plunge into the IIT plus IIM and the MS part of your career, so please tell us about your formative years, your family, your school. I mean, how exactly you grew up, what are the value system that you gained from people around, and so forth.
So I had I think for my time, an interesting, if kind of a very geographically diverse growing up background. So I was born in Patna, grew up in Ranchi, Jamshedpur, Coimbatore, Lucknow. I did my class 12 from Lucknow and then went to IIT in Kanpur. Then I worked for a year in Kota in Rajasthan. Then I got my MBA from Ahmedabad. Then I worked in Delhi and Bombay. So I was kind of, by the time I was 27, I had lived in maybe around 10 places. And so, and I had gone to 5 different schools. So fairly diverse background, but I grew up also in a large family. And we kind of used to hang around together a lot more than is the case today, where time is at such a premium. I think we used to have more time at hand during those times. I come from a family which has many professors, so that's been, I think, a very strong influence in my life. My grandfather was a professor. My father started his career as a professor, then became a manager and a chairman of a company, and then returned to being a professor. Got many aunts who have been professors. So that was the kind of background that I grew up with. And I like to think, I like to research, I like to teach. So that's basically what I do for a living these days. The thinking, the researching, and the teaching also lead to a fair amount of consulting opportunities. So very interestingly, even during these times of COVID, I've got a couple of inquiries, one of which is actually moving forward, where there is a company that is looking at this COVID as an opportunity. There is a saying which says, "Why waste a good crisis? There is an opportunity in every crisis." And this company is looking at trying to build a brand during this time, and I'm very happy to be associated with a project that leads me to think about how to build a brand during these times using some of the principles that I do teaching in and research about. So one of the courses, for example, that I teach is neuroscience and consumer behavior. And some of those ideas are directly applicable to the projects that I'm thinking about. So I
Okay.
hope that gives you a flavor for a little bit about my background.
Yes, sir. So, when you chose this IIT plus IIM in your days, and that would be like 3 decades ago, so was it as hot a combination as it is today? Because those times, these high-paying investment banking jobs and consulting jobs weren't there. So, what really triggered like an IIT plus an IIM kind of a combination in you?
So there's no great secret to that. I have to confess that I didn't plan this career of IIT and IIM. The IITs happened because I was in class 11 and thinking about what to do next. And a friend of mine whose elder brother was already there in IIT, he said, I'm planning to apply for IIT. You should also try. So I said, let me give it a try. And it worked out. I liked chemical engineering, chemistry, so I went for IITs. During the IITs, I kind of discovered my liking for psychology and the social sciences, and I was very deeply interested. So it was kind of very ironic. I was doing engineering, but I used to get an A grade in psychology and economics and all of those courses without doing much work, almost automatically, whereas I had to work really hard to get some good grades in the engineering courses, which was when I realized that I need to move into management. And So when I graduated from IIT, I had three job offers. One was as a management trainee with DCM Limited, and the other two were with ACC and BHEL, and the other two were chemical engineering jobs. So this was a management job. So I took up the DCM job. My management training program at DCM was, it was supposed to be the gold standard at that time, where you got mentored by Vinay Bharatram or all those leaders of the companies. Sadly, at that time, DCM Limited was kind of separating into the different companies that we know today. And so we were not really getting much mentoring, which was what I had signed up for. And so therefore I said, okay, time to move. And I gave the IIM entrance exam, CAT, and I was able to make it through. And again, it was not about money. It was about trying to pursue a line of thinking, a line of interest, something that one was keenly interested in. And having made it to IIMA, I think it really helped because you got a peer group. Both IIT and IIM, I think in that sense, for me, apart from the learning from the professors, it was also a lifelong peer group that one formed, that one can engage with at any point in time. Even today, for example, just before this conversation that I'm having with Anurag, I was actually on a call on the global macroeconomic situation and investment opportunities around the world during this time and what one can do during this time. And this call was set up by one of my batchmates who happens to be involved in the financial services industry in a very notable fashion. So those links that I formed were really important. And IITs and IIMs for me were kind of paths to the future, but it was never really about the money, and simply about learning some new stuff, about hanging out with good people, interesting people that I still find interesting after 30 years. And I learn from them, and hopefully they learn a little bit from me as well. After all, I am a professor, so even my batchmates should be able to learn something from me.
Yes, so there are so many books in the background. I remember I used to get scared when I used to come into your chamber. Sir, आप इतना पढ़ते कैसे हैं? आप बोलते थे कि हम प्रोफेसर हैं, हमारा काम ही किताबें ही पढ़ना है.
So absolutely, as a professor, one has to know, how can I profess? The job of a professor is to profess. How can I profess unless I know? I have to know something before I profess. So books are, by the way, one part of it. One has to read a lot, definitely. Well, as a business professor, what is equally important is to engage with industry and to do research and maybe write some articles and books. So that is the second part of what one does, to be able to do research and writing. In fact, I just finished a book on which is based on the work in neuroscience and consumer behavior of the last several years. The book is called Brands and the Brain, and I just submitted it a couple of weeks ago to the publishers. So let's see how long. Hopefully, over the next few months, the book should be published. So as a professor, one also needs to create new content that other people can consume. And also, to be a good professor, especially a good business professor, one needs to engage with industry, to do assignments with industry. So in the last 1 year, for example, we've done one marketing. I have done as a consultant. I've done one marketing strategy design for a large commodity company. I've done one pricing approach for a consumer electronics retail firm. I have also done one study for an electric bike manufacturer where we are helping them develop the pricing and the branding approach. So one keeps doing these assignments. Of course, there's a limitation to how many of these assignments one does, because as a professor, my primary responsibility is teaching and research. And as a professor, the academic system allows you to do 53 days of outside work a year. So this consulting comes in that 53 days of outside work a year. And the importance of that consulting is that as a business professor, you are not then teaching stuff which has limited connection to reality, because as a business professor you should be able to associate concepts, ideas, tools to the reality, and that is what increases the value add in the classroom. So it kind of becomes a virtuous circle. You do teaching, you do consulting, You do research which might be based on consulting, and then the output of the research and consulting comes back into the classroom and creates more future managers and leaders. And then some of them come back to you and they want you to consult for them, and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I've been enjoying it for the last 30 years, and God willing, inshallah, I will enjoy it for the next 30.
Sir, so 8 years at London Business School, now 16 years and still going strong at IIM Ahmedabad. So how have you seen marketing as a subject evolve? So early 2000, the case study that used to make the rounds was Britannia Ka World Cup, where you had to scratch that packet and maybe get a chance to win the World Cup final. And now neuro consumer behavior, analytics, digital. How has that entire classroom education in MBA, marketing as a professor, evolved?
That's a very good question, Anurag, and it has what I call as an answer which contains in itself quite a strong contradiction. So one part of the response to that question is that nothing actually changes in marketing. 5,000 years ago in Babylon or in the Indus Valley civilization, people were doing marketing in particular ways. And some of the key ideas and concepts that they were using over there, as far as we can make out, are not very different from what we are teaching today. So that's one part of the response, that marketing has been around forever. So ever since human society has formed, ever since civilization has formed, marketing has been around in one form or the other. In Babylon, for example, they used to have these tablets where they would draw these images of products that they would put out in the shops. The precursor of the modern billboards that you have outside on the roads and of advertising on the internet. In another way, marketing has changed completely in the last 100 years, and especially in the last 20 years. You have shifted to a digital medium. The scale and the speed of the information flow that allows people, customers, to make decisions has changed. One-to-one physical interaction, face-to-face physical interaction has become a lot less than what it used to be. And COVID will probably accelerate the process, because people will be, in the near term at least, a little more scared to be talking face to face for fear of infection. So the move to digital will become stronger. The understanding of how the brain works has advanced in the last 20 years. So one can actually use the ideas, principles, and the applications of neuroscience to design better digital media that will more likely draw the response that one is looking for from the customer. So the customer actually follows a particular navigation path on a website and then clicks on the button to buy. So there are direct applications of neuroscience in digital marketing, and probably the future will lead to more and more of this. I'm kind of reminded of an article of a book actually by a very famous science fiction writer called Isaac Asimov. So Isaac Asimov's two most famous series of novels, just like you have Harry Potter today, in those days you had the Foundation series and the Robot series. So one of the books in that robot series which is a history of the future, where there are robots who are helping humans. So there are these humans who have evolved to a point in time where they use robots for interaction, and they don't really see each other or talk to one another or engage with one another face to face. They only do what you and I are doing today. We view one another electronically, sell stuff to one another electronically, buy stuff, and it's the robots that deliver everything. So maybe that's the direction in which we are proceeding. I can't say I'll be too happy with it, because I've grown up with people around me and I love to engage with people, and I'm much more happy with engaging with people face to face. But if the future is interaction on digitally, then that's where we will go. As a customer, if that's where the customer is going, as a marketer, as a marketing professor, that's where we will also go. But the interesting thing is that some of the fundamental underlying principles of human behavior, they will still not change. So for example, the human brain is wired to connect to something, to other people, to brands or something. So that need to connect will still be there, except that the manifestation of that connection will happen through digital media rather than through physical media. So a long answer to your very succinct question is that nothing has changed and everything has changed.
So the way the amygdala of the brain gets activated, or dopamine gets released as you teach in your classes, that will happen over the laptop rather than the eye
Exactly.
contact. So
Exactly.
that is
Exactly.
going to have a fundamental shift. So in terms
Exactly.
of MBA education, if you were to look at the more of a macro picture, how has MBA education evolved, like from the late 80s when you were an MBA student and IIM Ahmedabad, and then when you went to London Business School, now IIM Ahmedabad, the psyche of the customers in this case, who are the students, who do they come straight away just with a placement mindset? The media kind of creates a lot of frenzy around the placements. Do people really still want to learn? Are they grade oriented? Is that rat race still on? Do you give marks for CP still? I mean, those kind of questions I would like your view.
Let me divide your question into three different parts. One is the nature of the MBA education and the content that gets shared in the MBA education. So that will be the first part of my response. The second part of the response is the mindset of the people who come for an MBA. And the third is I will take a punt at the future of the MBA itself as a degree. Uh, so on the first part, kind of will build on my earlier response. Nothing has changed and everything has changed. So some of the basic principles of any particular area of inquiry, whether it is marketing or finance or organizational behavior or strategy or information systems, the basic principles are still the same, but the way in which those principles get expressed are different. So if I'm going to be talking about customer behavior, the way that we learned it in the 80s and early 90s when I was doing my PhD at the University of Texas, uh, the behavior was different because the context in which the behavior happened was different. There was no digital media to speak of. I didn't access a computer till I was 17 years old. Today's kids grow up with a computer till the time they're 3 years old, even earlier. So that the way in which it is actually applied and expressed either in the classroom or on a digital medium has changed. So the way in which people imbibe information, the way in which they kind of process information and take information out from outside is changing. And so to that extent, the MBA education system is changing. The delivery mode is kind of changing. The content, some of it remains the same, some of it will change because you didn't have stuff like blockchain or artificial intelligence or IoT back there in those days. So in that sense, the content has changed substantially. Some basic principles still remain. How will the content change in the future? That we will come to as part of the third in terms of how the MBA education will evolve. The second part is how has the mindset of the people who do an MBA, how has that changed? So if you look at the cohort that I studied with, and plus minus 1 or 2 3 years either way in the late 80s, early 90s, the proportion of people who were less driven by the pay packages, if you will, was probably higher. But partly, in all honesty, because the pay was not that much, you came there for opportunities in life rather than just the pay package. People still come for opportunities in life rather than, I would like to hope, rather than just for the pay packages. But the pay packages do loom large when you're getting 22 lakhs, 25 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs as your pay package post an MBA. Having said that, you also have to remember that the cost of an MBA education today is much higher than what it was during the time that I did my MBA in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. The fees were, very measly, around 600 rupees, 1,200 rupees, which was not really much, and you got a salary of 4,000 rupees. So hardly anything. The fees have gone up a lot. The fees are now 20 lakhs, 22, 23 lakhs, 24 lakhs, I think, for PGPs. For PGPX, it's closer to 30 lakhs. And so commensurately, the salaries have also gone up. There are 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs, average of 24 lakhs, 25 lakhs for the PGPs, I think, and even more for PGPX. So in that sense, again, nothing really has changed because the ratio of the salary to the fees is kind of in the same ballpark. 1:1.5, 1:1, in that ballpark. But the absolute amount is very large, and therefore people end up taking loans, and so they are much more concerned about the pay package, and rightly so. Is there competition? Yes, smart people tend to be competitive to some extent. We had very smart cohorts back then at IIM Ahmedabad. We still have very smart cohorts today in IIM Ahmedabad. So there is going to be competition. Is the competition a little bit more? Maybe a little bit more, I think. But that's across different fields and sectors and geographies. It's not just limited to MBA. The last part, and I think the more important part, in fact, I would say the most critical and most important part is what is the future of MBA education? So I'm sure you would know already that in the United States, apart from the top 10 schools or maybe the top 20 schools, the MBA education is dying. Case Western Reserve University has reduced its MBA program from 240 people to 60 people, 4 sections to 1 section. University of Texas at Austin used to have a cohort size which was more than 600. Now it's down to 300. So the MBA is a kind of a generalist degree to help you take care of business. It's also an elite degree which allows you to go into certain areas which you would not be able to do otherwise. So why is the MBA as a degree becoming less attractive in the US? Because people are looking for more specialists rather than generalists. There will always be a need for generalists, but the quantity of people that you need with a general MBA management education is less. So that's why the top 20 schools will continue to have an MBA education, which will evolve, of course, and we will come to that in a minute. But outside of those schools, if you're doing an MBA from the United States, you're literally wasting your money. What is going to happen in India? In India, the MBA as an education will grow, continue to grow, because we need people who have some management background. But even here in India, the lesser quality schools who used to offer MBA as degrees are kind of falling by the wayside. So quality will matter in doing an MBA. And even here in India, if you're doing an MBA outside of the top 50 schools, it's probably not worth it. You would be better off doing an MBA, doing a specialist master's course that gives you some skills that are in direct demand. Which brings us to the question of how will the MBA itself evolve in the future, or how should it evolve going forward as the requirement for specialists becomes more. So even MBAs will need to have a higher level of technical knowledge than is the case today. So the way my feeling is, my sense is, my view is, my estimate is that the MBA curriculum should and will evolve is that there will be 2 tracks which will need to be built on. MBAs ultimately need to lead people. They need to manage people. They need to get people to achieve a particular goal. And that requires a very deep understanding of human beings. So psychology and neuroscience based courses will take greater emphasis. The second strand has to do with analytical skills. MBAs need to have strong analytical skills that allow them to take masses of data and generate insights on the basis of which they can lead people. So more and more courses will come which will lead to specializations in different areas which are driven by technologies such as AI or cloud or machine learning or IoT or blockchain and so on. So how do these different tools and technologies influence management would be a second leg. And the third leg, of course, would be the broader strategy, marketing and finance kind of approaches which have to be tied to the technologies. So the MBA of the future, I think, will be a tripod of these 3 things. And the top MBA schools will need to evolve to accommodate these 3. At IIM Ahmedabad, I think we're already making some moves in this direction. Many of our courses have these things. We run a course on fintech, for example, where we look at how blockchain is involved in being able to deliver services and how one can use it to do more efficient marketing, more efficient delivery of certain services, for example, trades, finance services. So it is happening and it will be an organic evolution. But the interesting thing is, I think for the first time in many, many years, there is a window of opportunity where new schools, new MBA schools, if they have the funding, can actually put in place an MBA school that will have the potential to leapfrog existing schools by using this tripod and marching ahead much more quickly. Because all the schools which were launched in the last 15, 20 years essentially followed the old model. today you have the possibility of creating this new model that is still evolving as we speak. So it is up to the schools which are leaders in their field, IIM Ahmedabad being one of them, to kind of also evolve, so that, and we are evolving in a measured phase, at a measured pace, but we do need to evolve so that we are able to then keep the MBA as a relevant certification, a relevant learning tool and body of knowledge that people will still want for both purposes, for learning and understanding, and for the purpose of getting good jobs as managers and leaders, which pay well, of course. I said pay well, of course, at the last, because pay for me always comes last. It is an outcome. It is a byproduct.
Byproduct.
It
Yeah.
will, it will happen if you do well, if you're serious about what you're doing. So I hope that answers your question.
So one question that emerges here is that in India, because perceptions, why MBA is so critical at IIM Ahmedabad is because 2.5 lakh people take CAT and only out of them 400 get into this prestigious 2-year PGP. What about the courses like PGPX, where the applicant to select ratio will be somewhere like 1:10, or EPGP, which is the new variant, where you might not have that strict, a formidable entry barrier? So in that case, will the market actually value you for your skill sets, or is it going to be some difference in perception? Because you've seen it from very close corners
So the
as a
market
dean
value,
alumni.
the market values two things, right? The market values quality of the intake, and the market values, and the market in this sense, the customer is the company that recruits from us, and the PGP or the PGPX student is the work in process or the product that goes out, not the customer, as you were talking. So the market values the quality of the work in progress intake, and the market values the quality of the instruction and the learning that happens, right? So one of the advantages of being an incumbent who is well reputed, like IIM Ahmedabad, one of the top ranked schools, is that you automatically attract the quality of the intake that you're looking for, because people want to come there. So it's a self-fulfilling dynamic, almost a virtuous circle that we are happy to be partaking from, right? The second part is the instruction part, the quality of the delivery of the different insights that we would like people to carry away, the frameworks, the tools, and so on. And that is a function of the content that you create and deliver, right? So the fortunate thing for institutions like IIM Ahmedabad and its peers are that they enjoy the fruits of this virtuous cycle that is already in place of a very good quality intake. It's a self-fulfilling mechanism that's already there, right? It's like almost a network effect which is already there, which we're enjoying the fruits of. So long as we continue to evolve and deliver value on the quality of the instruction, the delivery, and the content. So there are two parts. One is the quality of the delivery, and the other is the content which is there. Then that cycle will keep going, right? And my hope and expectation is that at least over here at IIM Ahmedabad, we will be able to do this. But not every school that is there at the top may be able to do this, and those that don't will fall by the wayside. And one of the biggest challenges of a new school, of course, is creating that virtuous cycle, right? How do you create that virtuous cycle so that you get enough of the quality applications that you're looking for, right? That is not easy, but this is a time window where it is possible to do that. If you have the resources, you can actually create that. It's never easy in education, but it is more possible now than perhaps it was 10, 20 years ago.
Great. So now I will move to the last part of this thing. So one, that at World Gold Council, you've done a lot of research work. So what is your key nugget in terms of the gold buying behavior of Indians? And as an investor, is it good time to buy gold?
So at IGPC, from around November 2018, our view has been that the price of gold will rise till at least the end of 2020. And in November 2018, the price of gold was around $1,100, $1,200 an ounce, maybe around 30,000 rupees for 10 grams. Today, the price of gold is around $1,700 an ounce, so 45,000 per 10 grams. Gold as an asset class in India fulfills the purpose of insurance, fulfills the purpose of part of the asset allocation in a larger financial portfolio, fulfills the purpose of passing down of wealth across generations, fulfills also the purpose of emotional security, also performs the role of jewelry and accessory in a fashion, and so on. And in the financial system, also gold is part of the reserves of central banks. So gold is kind of integral to the life of individuals and to the life of the financial system as well. And going forward, given the current uncertainties, gold buying is increasing. In fact, investment buying, bars and so on is increasing. Jewelry buying is decreasing a little bit. In consumption in India has been driven 60% by jewelry buying. That is decreasing, but that is being offset by, will be offset, is partly being offset. Of course, right now in the last quarter and last month, nothing is happening because there's no import, nothing is happening. But in the coming few months, you can expect slight increase in the investment buying. Jewelry buying, which got postponed because of this, for weddings, it's still a very large component of what you want to spend in a wedding as part of the habitual practices. The interesting thing, of course, is that the younger generation of women, many in the younger generation of women are less fascinated by gold than people, for example, in my generation or my mother's generation. My daughters, for example, they don't have this fondness for gold at this point in time, right? It is quite possible when they get married and so on, and when they have children, they might again recreate that fondness, because my wife, of course, like many women of her background and vintage, is extremely fond of gold, and I'm sure she must have passed along some of that fondness to my kids. So even though it is not manifesting just now, it could manifest later. So I don't see the fondness for gold going away completely, though it has become less. And the jewelers are working pretty hard to keep that fondness on, right? So for the first time in many, many years, organized jewelers are offering 14 karat gold jewelry, where you can buy a reasonably fashionable piece, which is 14 karat gold, for only 3,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees, which even youngsters can afford. So once you get into the habit of buying, and ultimately gold is a habit, once you get into the habit of buying, you will continue to buy. And if you continue to buy, the price of gold will remain firm. So long as there is demand, there will be there. The last point, of course, about gold, especially in the current environment of COVID, is as a hedge against uncertainty and risk. So that is one of the reasons why people are buying. And an even further point, if I were a conspiracy theorist, one would say that this is one of those inflection points in history where there's a shift in the global financial system. And the last time the global financial system had a major shift was between 1930 and 1945, when it shifted from Britain to America, and America led the financial world with gold standard. There are some people who think that China is trying for world supremacy, and they might then start doing that by accumulating gold. Now, the latter part is true. China has accumulated gold quite substantially in the last 15 years. The US was probably sitting on 50% of the total gold that existed at that point in time in the world. So those are some views on gold as an asset class. In terms of price, our stance continues to remain that there is still some upside potential left in gold, with the usual, but that opinion has the usual caveat that if you buy gold, it is at your own risk. Please don't blame me if you buy gold and the price of gold goes down.
So final two questions. One, since you are engaged into so many things, what is your mantra for regeneration and fitness?
I walk 35 to 40 minutes every day at the rate of around 6.5 kilometers per hour. And on about half of those days, out of the 4 kilometers that I cover, maybe 2 kilometers I will jog. And I do 20 minutes of yoga every day. So that's one part. The second part is I'm very careful with my diet, when I eat, what I eat, and how much I eat. So I think if you combine those two things, you can remain reasonably fit. And especially in these days, one has to remain fit. COVID as a phenomenon, if you look at the fatality rate, it's actually quite low. In India, even on the reported figures and deaths, it's quite low. But given that the actual infection rates tend to be 50 to 100 times larger than the reported figures, and deaths are more difficult to hide. Of course, some governments might still try to hide it, but in India, it's more difficult to hide deaths. So if you look at the deaths as a proportion of the total actual cases, it's actually extremely low. So if you remain fit, exercise within your house, just walk up and down the house for half an hour. You can do it. I have done it. I do it sometimes within my house as well. So that's, it's just that, nothing more.
So final question, what would Mr. Arvind Sahay now give an advice to an Arvind Sahay at the age of 20? So a youngster in the age group of 20-25 watching this show maybe, what would be your words of advice from a career perspective, from a life perspective, MBA perspective?
Now that is an interesting question. See, if you are asking me what is the advice I would give a 20-year-old advice if that Arvind Sahay were back in 1985 when I was 20, that's a different question than if I was born in 2000 and I am 20 today. So which one are you asking?
Aja, both. Just since.
So the advice to the 20-year-old Arvind Sahay in 85, I don't think I would have any advice because it was a different world. The information that you had was somewhat limited. It was a different social milieu. Um, you thought differently at that point in time. So I wouldn't have any advice for the Arvind Sahay of 1985.
To take a
Um,
different path, to make different
Not really.
choices.
Not really. Not really. But if I had been born in 2000 and I was giving a 20-year-old Arvind Sahay who was born in 2000 advice today, I would say that these days you have too much information. Uh, it's kind of literally information overload. Figure out a way to reduce your information intake into manageable chunks and begin to form a view which is more informed by the fundamentals rather than by the huge wave of information. What is the crux of the information that you are getting from different fields? How can you merge that to form a mental and emotional framework for yourself for life? That would be the one thing that I would say, because I find a lot of 20-year-olds today are just deluged by information and they are reacting. They are just reacting to that information. And that prevents them from having a stronger sense of what is right for them, even though they are much more informed than we ever were when I was 20. But that deluge of information leads to some choices which are suboptimal. And so, therefore, my strong suggestion, strong advice, request to them, submission to them would be that figure out a way to manage that information well, to form frameworks around that information that fit your personality, that fit your likes and dislikes better. So that then you're able to filter and take better and make better choices because you have so many more choices than the 20-year-old Arvind Sahay in 1985 ever did. So it was not that difficult to do things at that time. It's a lot more difficult
Absolutely.
to do things today.
Absolutely,
So thank
sir.
you so much, Anurag.
Thank you so much, sir, for
It was such a pleasure talking to you.
sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. All right. Bye bye.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Thank you.